I'm going to make a very simple video about laws of nature. That in nature, there really are no laws. What there is in the world are really rules that we make up, because those rules are for our own practical purpose. I'm going to kind of go along with a little bit of what William James was talking about. Basically, pragmatism. I'm going to turn on this light a little bit and make it a little bit lighter in here. But it's about it being pragmatic. Rules that we create, we do it basically as a tool. It's just like any type of tool. It's like a hammer or a screwdriver or something. And its value is to the degree that it serves us. It's just like, a hammer is good to the degree that it serves you, or a screwdriver to the degree that it serves you. If it breaks and it doesn't work for you anymore, you throw it out. Although sometimes things break, you can still use it for something else. Maybe you could use it as a doorstop. You find another use for it. But rules work. They either work or they don't work. It's like if you were following a set of rules of how to cook something. Let's just simply say like a recipe. If you follow this recipe and it produces a particular thing that you like, then it's valuable. If you produce something and it turns out to be something you don't like, then it's worthless. It's the same thing with laws of nature. They're like rules of how you're supposed to expect or what you're supposed to anticipate. You should anticipate, for example, that flames are going to be hot. That when you drop something, it's going to fall. You say you take an object, you drop it, it's going to fall. You anticipate that. You anticipate that if you take a glass, like a wine glass, and throw it up in the air and it falls on the concrete pavement, it's going to shatter. Laws of nature work that way. Science is that way too, because but the thing with science, of course, you get more complicated, more involved, more details about it. But it really is the same thing. It's basically rules of how to think. It's like what Einstein said. He said that basically it's just a system of thinking. It's a system of thinking. You should expect this to happen. Maybe it's more complicated to the point where you can predict something. Let's say like when the next solar eclipse is going to occur. You know not only when it's going to happen, what part of the world it's going to cover, which parts are going to have a total eclipse, which parts are going to have 90% or 50% or whatever. But it's knowing what to expect and accurately knowing. It's like knowing that if I take insulin, it's going to lower my blood sugar. You know that that's what's going to happen. But you don't really know it as so much as you anticipate that happening. And if I anticipate, for example, let's say if my blood sugar was 200 and I take 1 unit of insulin and it lowers my blood sugar down to the normal level, like about 120 or something, then, I know that. I claim that as knowledge. That's what you say is knowledge. Basically, you have a consistency between what you claim and what you experience. There's a matchup between the two. It's just like everyday life. And I'll go back to Einstein again, using his quotes. That our everyday handling. Now, I'm thinking about John Locke's quote, but when Einstein said that basically that science, the difference between scientific thinking and everyday thinking is a matter of refinement. When you go to the store and you buy any particular thing, you open up a can and it has whatever you expect. Just like if I was to open up this can, I get my Planters nuts. I'm not doing my advertising for Planters. But you know that that's what's in this canister when you open it, because you're expecting it. And when you open it, when you buy a can of these nuts, you open it and that's what's in there. Cashews, for example. There's cashew halves and pieces. You expect that. You get used to that. You do it over and over and over. And so it just becomes automatic thinking. You just automatically just assume that that's what's going to be in that can. You don't expect to be surprised and find something else. You don't expect to find carrots in there, for example, or spinach. You expect to find, cashew halves. In fact, you don't even expect to find peanuts in there. There shouldn't be any peanuts in there. There shouldn't be almonds in there. There should be cashews. So that's just everyday thinking. That's not really science. But again, like Einstein said, the difference between everyday thinking And scientific thinking is a matter of refinement. Science may go a little bit further and talk a little bit more about things and go into deeper details about it. Basically, the kind of details that the average person doesn't really need to know or doesn't really care about, but still it's the same kind of thinking. It's just expecting something to happen a certain way. If you mix certain chemicals together, you're going to get a certain reaction. You know, if you drop an object, it's going to fall a certain rate. If you launch something into outer space, it's going to orbit the Earth a certain way. If you put a certain amount of force and power behind that rocket and do things a certain way, you're going to, you know, it's the same type of thing. It's just expecting things to happen that way and kind of anticipating that it's going to happen that way. And understanding that Newton's laws of motion are going to be part of that. And you can figure out stuff ahead of time. In many ways, you have explanations, you know, your laws of nature, and they are valuable to the degree that they serve you. And that's all it comes down to. That's really what science is. Now, let's kind of get into this thing, because I borrowed from the library a book called Moral Landscape, which is Sam Harris' book. And he talks about, I haven't read it yet, I'm going to read it, but he talks about how science can determine values. Basically, what are values? It was not just facts. It's like getting to this point of what should we value? Well, to tell us that, basically, I think he's going to wind up telling us what we already know. We should value life. We should do things toward making things more peaceful. We should do things toward greater harmony, peace, better quality of life. All these things. But you know what? You don't need science to tell us that. Remember Einstein's statement that the difference between scientific thinking and everyday thinking is a matter of refinement. Well, it's just a more refined version of that. So whenever we start refining our thinking, I suppose that's when it becomes science. But I don't think that you can say science tells us that, because then we get into a question of what is science, which we've never really addressed, really. And I think that's one of the most worn out words, you know, science and scientific. People often say, well, that's very scientific. And if it sounds scientific, it becomes authority, which is another word. There's so many words I used to think about this, worn out words, like science, scientific. People would throw those words around to the point where they don't even have meaning anymore. Well, this is based on science. Really? This is scientific. Really? You know, because it has power to it. Power, science, certainty. Really? Is science certain about things? No, science is just a set of rules of what we should anticipate. But when we find exceptions to those rules, then we have to rearrange our whole entire theories to accommodate for that exception. Just like the movement of the planets thing, you know, the perihelion movement thing. You know, and when Mercury didn't follow the rules, now all of a sudden we had to rethink the rules. Einstein came up with some way of explaining that. But for 400 years, that ideal that the planets would move a certain way worked. But then when you come up with better and better equipment and you're able to observe exceptions to the rules, you can't have exceptions to the laws of nature. You can't have exceptions to the rules. And that's just the way it works. Nature can't have exceptions. But, you know, in everyday life, we can. Like I was listening to something yesterday on the TV, and some lawyer was talking about how laws work. You know, regular law, not science laws. Because you have rules, and then you have exceptions to the rules, and exceptions to the exceptions, and exceptions to the exception to the exception. You know, we always do that in everyday life. In culture, there are rules and then there are exceptions. You know, it's like when I was in Japan a few years ago, and I was thinking, Japanese people don't really expect me to obey every one of their rules. They expect it more from another Japanese person, but not from, you know, yeah, I mean, you conduct yourself in a certain way. You know, you don't like kill people and steal things, but you just, you know, if you didn't bow, you just reached out and shook hands, fine. You know, if you didn't eat the sushi the right way or do something with the chopsticks the right way, you know, that's one thing. People might come over there and talk to you, but you know, I think people are kind of more understanding of things. Just like, you know, me being a black person, understanding people who come into our culture. We don't expect you to follow every rule that we follow. There are certain basic things we figure will be common among all people. You know, don't come in and, like, you know, burn my house up and stuff. But, you know, if you didn't eat chitlins the right way, or didn't do something with the cornbread a certain way, or you put mustard on your cornbread, we might think that's odd. But, you know, we're not really going to jump on you too much about that. You know, you kind of learn to be a little bit more flexible. Some people are more flexible in their thinking about it. Yeah, there are exceptions. Well, he's different, and we explain it away. Well, he's a foreigner. He's an outsider. He's not one of us. And that's the way it works. That's life.